morning to you from our very handsome news studio. There's a huge and fascinating dilemma facing the country this winter. Do ministers listen to the increasingly desperate pleas for help from a big range of industries? Do they offer subsidies for pricey energy, let in more foreign workers in order to avoid queues, closures and shortages? Or do they hang tough, as the Prime Minister said he would last week, and force company bosses to pay higher wages here? Stick with the policy or flinch and then fold? Joined live in the studio this morning by both sides of that argument, by the business minister who's been sitting down with the company bosses, Kwasi Kwarteng, and by the founder of one of Britain's big six energy companies, OVO's Stephen Fitzpatrick. Giving a Labour perspective on the world energy market, the Shadow Trade Secretary, Emily Thornberry. And we haven't even mentioned coronavirus yet. It's all over, isn't it? Maybe not. I'll be joined by Jenny Harris, the head of the UK Health Security Agency. And George Clooney has been telling me why he felt a very personal need to direct his new movie.
This was a really kind film. It was gentle, and I needed that. And I felt like if I needed that, maybe other people might feel the same way.
Kind and gentle film, kind and gentle show. Reviewing the news, Sebastian Payne of the Financial Times and Minette Batters speaking on behalf of the farmers for the NFU. But first, the news headlines with Roger Johnson.
Andrew, thank you. Good morning. The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, has defended the government's handling of the energy crisis. Several energy suppliers have described the price cap system for regulating household bills as not fit for purpose amid spiralling gas costs. But writing in today's Sunday Express, Mr Kwarteng said that it would remain in place to protect consumers. The French authorities are calling on the British government to honour its promise to pay them more than £50 million to help them to try to stop migrants crossing the Channel by boat. Hundreds of people have made the journey in the past 2 days, leading to further tensions between France and the UK. Lebanon's electricity grid has shut down, leaving the entire country without power for the second weekend. Officials say that it's unlikely that supplies will resume before Monday amid an ongoing economic crisis. The blackout began yesterday after the country's two largest power stations shut down due to a shortage of fuel. The variety of plant and animal life in the UK is so depleted that it could cause an ecological meltdown. Scientists at the Natural History Museum say that the UK only has 53% of its biodiversity left, ranking in the bottom 10% of all countries. The researchers say that the consequences could mean a future where nations are no longer able to produce enough energy, food or timber to meet the needs of their populations. And in boxing, Tyson Fury has knocked out Deontay Wilder to retain his title as the WBC heavyweight champion of the world. Fury knocked Wilder out in the 11th round of their bout in Las Vegas. That's it from me. The next news here on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Back to you, Andrew.
Tyson Fury, what would happen if politicians had some names they made up to represent themselves? Very interesting thought. As ever, to the front pages, however. Now, the royal family are all over every front. There's been some very heavy briefing going on. There's the Sun on Sunday. No way back for Prince Andrew, it says. Prince William sees him, he claims, as a threat to the monarchy. The Sunday Times has a similarly big story. Met officers are quizzing Andrew's sex accuser, they say. Andrew's legal team apparently going on the offensive. We'll be talking more about that later on. As the story about Boris Johnson after the Tory party conference going on holiday to Marbella. What's cost of living price? It says the Mail on Sunday has the same story on its front page, and inside a rather more friendly pro-Johnson take on all of that. He's very, very tired. They say he's been working very hard. The Sunday Express, our big story of the day, which is the energy crisis. We will keep you warm during the winter, says Kwasi Kwarteng. The Business Secretary, who is joining us later on the programme. The Observer has a different take on the labour shortage story that we've all been talking about last week. It says a nursing crisis is sweeping wards as the NHS battles to find recruits. And then finally, on a different story, the Sunday Telegraph, the Irish border. Remember that story well? Boris Johnson faces a fresh Brexit clash with judges, apparently. Now then, I'm joined by Seb Payne and Minette Batters, as advertised, as promised. Seb, let's start with you. The gas price story is probably what most people at home are thinking about this morning.
Indeed, in the Sunday Express, Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, has written an article saying that he will make sure people can have energy they can afford throughout the winter, and he references the energy price cap, which is under huge strain at the moment by rising gas prices. And he mentions in this article that the wholesale price of gas is 250p a therm, and the price cap is keeping it 65p. So that shows how much this policy is doing to keep prices down. But he is saying as well that they are not going to open up more gas from Russia with the Nord Stream 2, and instead the focus should be on developing the UK's nuclear industry and going green.
How long does that take? So that's decades ahead, isn't it? And we've all seen that terrifying spike in gas prices shooting up almost vertically, like some parts of the coronavirus epidemic almost going right up like that. And the price cap, £139, I think now, that goes in April. So a lot of people will be wondering what happens to it then.
Exactly, and I think that at that point it's obviously going to be reviewed when you look at the wholesale price of gas. But really, this whole thing is quite odd because the price cap was a Labour policy. It was when Ed Miliband was running for Prime Minister in 2015. He pledged that cap, and it was brought in, pledged by Theresa May in 2017. And now the Conservatives are heralding it as something that is helping and protecting the consumer. I think the cap will inevitably have to be raised when it comes to that review point. But the fact is, for the moment, the government is hanging tight, and this is going to be very difficult for energy companies.
Absolutely, and we're ahead of COP, the great climate change conference in Glasgow coming up, and ahead of that we're told the government wants to introduce all sorts of new green levies and move the levies from electricity onto gas to force people to get away from gas. Now that's a very, very provocative policy. I think the New Statesman has had a pretty comprehensive leak of what's likely.
Indeed, that we've got, as you said, COP26 coming up, and the government's hoping for a series of Glasgow breakthroughs I've heard about, where they will set a plan to get to net zero, not just the general aspirations. And this piece in the New Statesman here sets out what's going to be in the government's plan. And the most striking thing about this is the onus is very much on private individuals to get heat pumps, which even with government subsidy are going to cost £5,000 or £6,000 on individuals, to get people to better insulate their homes as well. And when you put that on top of the pressure on fuel bills, you do have to wonder how this is all going to chime together, and whether voters are going to be happy paying all this money.
I'm going to be talking about the effect of that on the red ball with you later on in this. But Minette, first of all, the briefing and the very long article in the Sunday Times magazine about Prince Andrew. I don't think I have read such a personally aggressive piece anywhere for a very, very long time. Members of the royal family, unnamed quoted, courtiers, unnamed quoted, and it really is a pretty devastating picture of him, isn't it?
It is devastating, and the sword of Damocles, there's some headlines out there, as you say, front page of the Sun, and the briefing, not only by royal courtiers, but the royal householders itself, Prince William being quoted, and the drip, this is going on and on and on. Stories of Prince Andrew hiding behind his mother's skirt up in Marr. It's really, really not good, and one's got to feel desperately, I feel desperately for the Queen in all of this as the story continues to run.
That says that the story which we're always told that Prince Andrew is her favourite child isn't necessarily true. But in terms of kind of watching the hierarchy of the royal family and who's really in control, this seems a moment where Prince William is kind of gently shouldering his way to the front of the stage.
It does look like that. He's not a man that says very much in the public domain, and so when he does say something, you feel, well, this is him really putting a marker down, because he does tend to only speak up when he has got actually something that he wants to put forward. So, and then of course we've got Prince Andrew's lawyers coming back and saying actually, they are going to aggressively defend this. So it feels almost like the start rather than the beginning of the end.
Now, the other big story that I've noticed this morning is about the vaccination of children. particularly in England, because we now have a lower rate of overall vaccination in some of the continental countries where we thought we were way ahead. We were doing best, and now they're ahead of us, the French, the Spanish, the Germans and others. But that is above all because British children are not being vaccinated that heavily, are they?
The piece here, Sunday Telegraph child vaccination. I mean, Scotland, clearly, they've got a quarter of children vaccinated in that age group, 12 to 15-year-olds, 10% only in England. I think there's a combining storm here of education, parents feeling confident. They're talking about only 40% of parents feeling confident to get their children vaccinated. So the education that needs to happen to get parents to feel confident. But you've also got access. There's Glyn Potts saying, head of Newman Roman Catholic Church in Oldham, talking about the challenges of enough people to go out and do these vaccinations. So the perfect storm, again, of labour requirements, understanding, worries about the vaccine, creating this sort of perfect storm in England.
Really interesting. We're talking to Jenny Harris about that later in the show. Now, Sam, I know that you've been up and down the Red Wall all winter in your Mini. Was it a Mini? You were driving around trying to work out what voters were really thinking. I alluded at the top of the show to a big dilemma facing the government. Do they hang tough on their policy of keeping out foreign workers and all the rest of it? And do they hang tough on higher taxes? In some ways, they're a surprisingly left-of-centre government, at least fiscally at the moment. And Tim Shipman, we always look to for really good long reads in the Sunday Times, has written about the red Tory problem the Conservative Party now faces under Boris Johnson. Tell us more.
Well, this is a very striking image you can see there with Boris Johnson lined up with some of the great communist figures of the past there. And I think this speaks to the idea of what is Johnsonism, that when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, it was on that platform of getting Brexit done. Then in the 2019 election, he won that big majority by winning over parts of the UK, or England, I should say, that have never voted Conservative before. And as you said, I've visited a lot of those places for my book and to try and figure out what they want. And what's so interesting about Tim Shipman's long read here is, are there just two inherent contradictions in what Johnsonism is trying to do? Because when you looked at his conference speech last week, he was straddling the left and the right. He was praising bankers and businesses and entrepreneurs on the one hand and pledging to keep migration down, and on the other hand he was pledging more state spending and higher taxes. And it's something we've not seen for quite a long time in British politics.
You were at the Tory conference. Did you see those strains beginning to appear in sort of late night parties and conference scenes all around the place?
You did actually, that you could see it. It was really in some ways tax was the dominant bark at Tory conference.
Yes.
But if you spoke to people after a couple of glasses of champagne that was flowing very much in Manchester this year, you could see they are unhappy. Many Tories in their heart are not Johnsonian. They are low tax, they do want a smaller state, but they do also realise this is what they need to do to keep onto the red wall. And I think it's probably true, because in 2016, 17 and 19, big part of England voted for lower migration, and that's what he's going for.
Minette, all week we have seen pictures of distraught pig farmers on our televisions. I had an exchange with Boris Johnson about whether there was going to be, in his words, a hecatomb of pigs being destroyed, 120,000, biggest cull, I think, in the history of British farming. And yet, those pigs haven't been mostly killed yet. And some people will be wondering, was this all just a bit of lobbying? Is this shroud waving? Is it really going to happen?
It's most certainly not shroud waving. We know that 4,500 pigs are set to be slaughtered next week. And this is a very, very challenging situation for pig farmers. Indeed, we are potentially looking at the end of the size of the pig farm structure that we have in this country unless we sort it. So the ask is, because we've got such a shortage, the ask is that we look at the visa scheme, skilled workers, and we look to lower the requirement on English. That would access the quality, the vital riches that are needed to bring here at the moment. We've got agencies out in South America who are looking at it. We know there are people who can come here, but we need to look at that visa scheme now.
Doing that now, right now. Like a lot of people, I have been getting my fix of farming from a slightly surprising and unusual source, Jeremy Clarkson. And Clarkson's Farm has been a huge hit. Do you talk to him at all?
I do talk to him a lot. Indeed, he won most recently the Farmers Weekly Farming Champion, which was sponsored by us, for what he has done, bringing farming to an audience that had not been engaged.
we're starting to understand farming, so perhaps for the first time.
Indeed, it's not my natural viewing, but I watched Clarkson's farm over the summer, and I think it shows how much strain the industry is under, the tight margins, the capital investment, and how you're open to elements out of your control, be it the market or be it the weather.
And a huge amount of pressure on time. We've run out of time here, but thanks both very much indeed. Very interesting indeed. And so to the weather, an absolutely gorgeous autumn day yesterday in London. Too gorgeous, unsettlingly gorgeous. Over to Susan Powell in the Weather Centre. Susan.
Thank you, Andrew. It may have seemed too good to be true, but actually we have another beautiful looking day to come today. Some early cloud across East Anglia and the southeast, but we are looking at skies clearing. This is a weather front that's sitting in place currently, but it's moving through, and behind it lots of sunshine already across the remainder of England, Wales, Northern Ireland and southern and eastern Scotland. Much drier, much brighter here than it was yesterday. Quite windy for western Scotland today. That will feed some showers into the coast. The wind's gusting up to gale force potentially at times here. Some showers for the Northern Isles as well. Elsewhere, a little bit of patchy rain out of that front, but a lot of dry weather to come. Sunshine and still warm to the south, 19 or 20 degrees. Looking on into the week ahead though, we are going to move into some slightly cooler air than we were sitting in last week, so our temperatures will come back to around average values for the time of year rather than above, and by the end of the night tonight that cooler air will have worked its way south across the UK. So tomorrow morning a little fresher than we've been used to, temperatures in the mid-range of single figures, a little bit of rain to come in for Scotland again to start the week, but through the week ahead not much rain actually to speak of. High pressure will sit to the south of the UK, meaning for many areas it will be dry. There'll be a little bit of early morning mist and fog, but I think we are going to see a lot more pleasant autumn sunshine in the next 5 days or so.
And that has to be good news. So far this autumn, 12 of Britain's energy companies have gone bankrupt. But the big six are still standing firm. Can they last? OVO Energy is the third largest with 4.5 million customer. Its founder, Stephen Fitzpatrick, is with me. So a very straightforward question to start with. Are you sure that you're going to make it through this winter?
Yeah, we've been well hedged through the whole winter. We've been buying,
bought up energy.
Hedging is buying ahead of time, yes. So we have about 4.5 million customers in the UK. We've been buying power and gas for those customers going back to the start of last year. And we hedge in advance. And unfortunately, there are a lot of companies in the market that have sprung up quite recently. There's been some great competition in the UK market. Consumers have benefited, but I think over the last couple of years, it's become too easy to get into the energy market. It's a very complicated industry. And I think some people have underestimated some of the risks and how complicated it is. So there are, unfortunately, a lot of companies having a hard time. There's probably going to be more to come.
Well, I was going to ask you, what are the big six? If we have a really cold winter, are you absolutely sure the big six can survive?
There are lots of different scenarios, and at the moment the big issue is not about the temperature and how cold it is, because we can look back in time and say this is how much energy we use at different temperatures and so on. The big uncertainty we've got at the moment is around price, and as we've already discussed, prices are up 1,000% already in 12 months. And
I'm sorry, I'm going to come back to that original question. In those circumstances, those eye-wateringly high prices and no sign of them coming down,
yes,
are the big six definitely going to survive?
Andrew, I mean, nobody comes on television and says that they're absolutely definitely anything. But what I can tell you is that there are some energy companies that have not been well hedged, not been well run, and they're suffering. And I think for most of the larger energy companies that have been through this before, I mean, in the very first year that OVO was founded in 2009, energy prices doubled in the first 6 months. So we have been through this kind of thing before.
I guess the reason I'm pressing this is there's a system called the supplier of last resort.
Yes.
If a big company goes down, then it passes to the next company and they pick up the customers and so on. But if a really big company with millions of customers went down, would that system of last resort really be robust, resilient and reliable?
There's also a backup system called the special administration.
It's basically the government moving.
Yeah, Ofgem take over the running of the company. And I think in terms of a very, very large system failure, that's probably what would happen.
Because some of the energy analysts says that if a really big company goes, then that system in turn won't really be robust enough. The government are going to have to put in quite a lot of money to keep the industry going.
The situation we're facing at the moment is that the price cap consumers from this enormous and unprecedented spike in energy prices. Consumers are being protected, but at the moment, if we buy gas and electricity on the wholesale market, energy companies are every unit they sell. So if a company were to go out of business and then another energy supplier takes over those customers and then has to buy that energy, they'll be selling it at an enormous loss.
So that's a huge loss. Every time you expand at the moment, it's a loss. Because a lot of people think that your company might be looking at taking over bulk.
So we are very focused right now on our customers. We've hedged well ahead, and we're hedging again into next summer and even into next winter. We're ready to do what needs to be done. The way that the solar process works, Ofgem runs an auction and then appoints somebody to take over those customers. The one thing I would say is that when we hear about the no bailouts for the energy sector and so on, and the industry will have to take care of this, what that really means is that the cost of the failed energy companies gets passed on to other consumers. So it doesn't just disappear.
It sounds to me as if you are not keen to take over bulk right from the start.
I would say we are looking at and preparing for lots of different.
That might be one of them.
There's a lot of different scenarios, and of course, large energy companies and small energy companies right now, we're all preparing for anything that might happen.
If a supplier with, say, more than 1.5 million customers goes under, are you sure the last resort system works?
The biggest constraint will be around our ability to buy the gas and electricity in an open market. So there is a point where you need to buy so much gas and electricity for those customers that you'll be pushing the price up by buying in the market. And that's where having a longer period of time to manage that would be better. In any case, I would say the one thing to reassure everybody on in terms of consumers, in the state of the world that we see at the moment, there's really nothing consumers need to worry about in terms of the lights going out this winter, there not being enough power.
It's not going to happen.
No, and then also, because of the price cap, they are protected from the worst of all of this.
In the end, is taxpayers' money going to be needed to keep the energy supply system working?
So, I would say, when you look at whether it's taxpayers or consumers' money, there is going to need to be a higher price that we pay for energy over time. I think probably what's best for consumers is to see that smoothed out. It's not that we can somehow magically subsidise or make energy cheaper, but it's a good idea for that to be smoothed out so households can prepare for it. If you talk about the consumers paying, what that really means is that everybody's paying the same. And what that means is lower income households end up paying a disproportionately high amount. If we pay for them through the tax system, which is a progressive system, wealthier people of society end up paying more. So I think the one thing I'd like to say is that what we really need to see from government is to take a look at what's going to happen in a cold weather scenario. We have some really welcome policies, the household support scheme, I think it's £500 million that was announced last week, but that really needs to be maybe 2 or 3 times bigger to prepare for a cold winter scenario.
So up to now we've been talking about, as it were, individual consumers, households. What about the big energy-intensive industry, the cement makers, the steel makers? They've been in to see the government this week, and they say cap for individuals, cap for us too. That's what we need to survive.
So I'm not an expert on energy-intensive industry, energy policy, but I think there is only so much money to go around, and we have to put the lowest income households first. After that, for sure we can have a discussion, but
so
anybody that's buying
caps for industry a possible idea?
I think if you're a large energy user, you should be hedging for your demand ahead of time, and I think what we really need to look at more than the very, very short-term impact. We're going to be hosting COP26 in 3 weeks' time, and we need a longer-term energy policy. And look, the ask that I've got for the government, as well as more support for lower-income households, is that we really need to have an energy policy that's going to span the next generation. It cannot be decided on a 4-year electoral cycle.
There will be people watching, Stephen, who say your company had more than £1 billion of turnover last year. It's a really big company. Why should the taxpayer help companies like yours?
So let's be clear. We are not asking for or expecting any taxpayer support. Our revenues last year were 4 or 5 billion. So
I'm so sorry.
That's great.
A few billion out.
But last year, I think the COVID experience last year was a really good example of just how far the energy industry has come and how much it's changed. Very very quickly we were able to work with government, with our regulator Ofgem, and come together and put in hundreds of millions of pounds of support for low-income households. OVO alone put up £50 million of debt forgiveness and extra credit for customers to make sure that they work without power and gas during COVID. We need to work with government again, and I think we need the Treasury, we need BEIS. In fact, one of the things I think we really need to start to look at is a dedicated Department for Energy and Climate Change. We used to have one, and we no longer have a government department whose job it is to help manage the energy transition, and it's the biggest challenge we face in our time.
Stephen, it's been absolutely gripping talking to you. Thanks so much for coming in. Now then, if you're taking public transport or you're in the shops, you may have noticed a very big proportion of the people you come across aren't wearing masks anymore. It's almost as if we as a country have decided the coronavirus pandemic is over. But we've a much higher rates of infection than many other European countries. I spoke a little earlier to Jenny Harris, who used to be Deputy Chief Medical Officer, and she now heads the UK Health Security Agency. She says one of the biggest current threats is flu, and we could have up to 60,000 deaths.
So this comes from their report from July earlier this year, which was a very helpful report looking at a number of variables for winter and recognising, of course, that we hadn't had the flu exposure that we've had previously, so people are more susceptible. But actually that is the upper range of their estimate, and it was between 11 and 60,000. So it is plausible, but it is one part of a model, and I think we need to think of it in that way.
Not to focus on it too much. Now, because there hasn't been so much flu circulating, because we've been wearing masks and staying inside and all of that, I gather that makes it harder to be absolutely sure that this flu vaccine is highly effective on this particular strain of flu. As somebody who's had my flu vaccine, are you concerned about that?
So it's a more uncertain year, but I certainly would be encouraging everybody to go and get to the vaccine. As usual, we work with WHO. We look at what's happened on the other side of the world, because obviously their winter season comes first, and we have a multi-strain vaccine, so it will be two influenza A's and two influenza B's. But there is a slightly higher degree of uncertainty around that, partly because we've had such few cases, and partly because individuals' health-seeking behaviours, if you like, have meant that they perhaps haven't come to be tested as much, and therefore we won't have so many samples on which to base that decision.
So without scaremongering, we are a bit more vulnerable this winter.
Yes, I think the important messages here is this is probably the first season where we will have significant amounts of COVID circulating as well as flu. People's behaviours have changed, we're mixing more, winter weather is coming along, everybody's going into enclosed spaces. And we do know from the small amount of data that we've had previously that people are at more significant risk of death and of serious illness if they are co-infected with flu and with COVID, and that doesn't seem to be, from our studies, a fact which many of the public understand.
Well, let's talk about COVID if we could. We've still got quite a large number of cases, about 40,000 or so each day. And yet that is less than half of what we're being told back in July. Why are we doing so much better, as it were?
We've obviously had extremely good vaccine uptake, and that is now preventing very significant amounts of hospitalisation and death. It's over 90%, whichever vaccine you've had, effective against those particular outcomes. But I think the important thing here is each of these models, it's a scenario, a possible scenario, and in fact we are tracking along one of those scenarios fairly steadily, and probably the difficulty is at this point in the pandemic it's one of the most difficult times to predict what will come. We have different levels of vaccination, we have a little bit of immunity waning in those in older individuals, which is why we're now starting to put in a COVID booster vaccine. We have slightly different effectiveness and different vaccinations that have been provided.
We are running at 120 deaths or so a day. Have we decided as a society that is an acceptable death rate?
So clearly we've got large vaccination programmes ongoing, we've got significant testing. This isn't how we normally treat an endemic disease, so I think the answer to that is very very clearly no, we're taking it extremely seriously. But it is important to remember that for an average flu season, it's about 11,000 deaths a year. It's somewhere between 4,000 to 22,000 over the last 4 to 5 years. So we are starting to move to a situation where perhaps COVID is not the most significant element, and many of those individuals affected will of course have other comorbidities which will make them vulnerable to serious illness for other reasons as well.
You mentioned the amount of COVID passing around children at the moment. Now, in England, there's 204,000 children absent from school at the moment. I think that's about 3 times the normal for this time of year. How seriously should we take the problem facing children, given that they're less at risk from the illness?
So as you say, the critical point is they are less at risk, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't take it seriously. And I think there is a really important balance here, which I think has been well articulated in the media, of how significant the impact of not being in school is. So this is a balanced position. I think the other important thing is that whereas a child with COVID should not be in school, there have been many steps taken to ensure that for most children they can be. And I think an important statistic is 99.9% of schools are open. So most children can attend and most will be continuing to benefit from that education.
Do you think that children should be wearing masks in school?
So I think I wouldn't put that at the top of my list of measures. I think the important thing is we should make sure children aren't in school if they are actually infectious. We've got a very good testing programme, and we know that at the start of the term we expected to see a surge in cases. I think this is really important. We saw a surge in cases as they were detected as children came back. It dropped down a bit, and then we've seen another surge.
Dr. Harris, you were talking about variants of the Delta variant a little while ago, and I can remember a year ago we were all obsessed by, is there going to be an Epsilon variant, and variant after variant after variant being more deadly and more infectious than the last one. But Dr. Gilbert, who knows more about this than probably anybody else, she doesn't think that's going to happen. She says, we normally see the viruses become less virulent as they circulate more easily. No reason to think they'll be different this time round. If COVID changes its spike protein so much it can't interact with the receptor, then it's not going to be able to get inside the cell. So there aren't very many places for the virus to go to have something that will evade immunity but still be a really infectious virus. In other words, stop worrying so much about the next variant. Do you agree with that?
Partly yes, but I think we should stay alert. So I think one of the interesting things we have seen is we've seen a number of different variants arise, and the ones which viewers will probably be most familiar with are Beta, for example, which was first diagnosed confirmed in South Africa. But what we've seen with Beta is where Delta has come through and there has been a significant surge, Beta has been suppressed, and we think that's happening now with Mu and Lambda. So with the dominance of Delta, it does look as though many of the other variants which have been detected are becoming extinct, and a number of variants under investigation have risen slightly. We've seen cases and they've become extinct. Now, while that holds, I think that's right, but I don't think it means we should be reducing our overall surveillance systems. We do need to stay alert to see. It's still very early days for a new virus.
As ever, thank you very much indeed for getting up early in the morning and talking to us. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, thanks.
So let's now get a sense of what the Labour thinking is on some of the big issues. Emily Thornberry, Shadow Secretary of State for Trade. Emily Thornberry, welcome. Let me ask you first of all about these price caps. All week, the big energy-intensive industries, the cement makers, the steel makers, the paper makers, the glass makers, have been saying, we need a price cap too. Do you agree with them?
They have been saying we need something. There has been a debate as to exactly what it is should happen. I think that what's important is that Kwasi listens to what it is the business says. There is a certain amount of kind of briefing going on behind the scenes where Kwasi is saying more words, quite like this, got to get it past the Treasury. The truth is we need to have a plan, we need to get on with it. But also the truth is we shouldn't be in a situation where we wait until there's a crisis and then react. We need to have proper planning.
I'm sure that's true, but we are in this situation
right now.
We're in this situation right
in the
now.
seat before me, right, was a guy from an energy company who said, what we should have is a Department for Energy and Climate Change. Now, excuse me, I was in that department, and what we said we should, but what we were doing was, we were making sure there were new nuclear power stations, we were making sure that we had gas storage, we were making sure that we were insulating homes. All of these things were happening. We were making sure there was offshore and onshore wind. Hang on, this is really important.
I know it's important, but we are where we are now.
Yeah, I know.
And
But
I'm just asking you
as
whether-
opposition, it is fair for us to say that when we were in power, these were the plans we had. The government cut those. We now have another wave of crisis. This government has wave after wave of crisis, and then I'm asked to come on and say, well, if you were in this situation, what would you do tomorrow? And I think it's only fair to make that point.
Sure, but it's also only fair for me on the other side of the table to ask whether you're in favour of a price cap for industry.
Yeah, and my answer is that what we need to be doing is listening to business, and frankly, if there's a strong case being made, we need to take it seriously. And I hope the next person sitting in this chair will tell you what his plan is.
Yes, but you can't tell me yes or no to that.
I can tell you that we are having meetings with industry, and we are thinking what the best way forward is, as far as we're concerned, but we also want to make the point that we should not be in a position where we're always having to respond at the very last minute to crises. And then for the government to be saying that it's all part of a cunning plan. You know, there are all these people queuing up at petrol stations, shortages in the supermarkets, all part of a cunning plan, and they want to change Britain, is the biggest example of chutzpah I've heard for a very long
Well,
time.
here's another thing where I think we probably can give a clear answer. The so-called green levy. So that's the levy on bills, currently mainly electricity bills, to ensure that people change away from carbon-emitting fuel and heating to different kinds of green fuel and heating. And there is a proposal that should move from electricity onto gas bills.
Yes.
What is the Labour view?
Yes. So the Labour view is that there are a number of strands to this. The first thing is that we would not have, we would not, in current circumstances, well, of course, we would certainly, but we would not be allowing for the universal credit cut. £20 is basically the amount of money that most below average households pays in their fuel bills. So we certainly would not be taking £20 away from families each week. That's the
But
first thing.
these levies are really big, and I just want to know whether you would keep them on for, the net zero goals and all the rest of it.
The next thing that one needs to do is one needs to make sure that houses are properly insulated, and if they had continued with our programme of greener homes over the last 11 years, then we would have huge numbers of homes, millions of homes, that would now be insulated.
Right.
Because you can have the greenest type of fuel coming into your home, but if it's going straight out the window, it doesn't do any
All
good.
true. I was asking a very straightforward question. All true, but I was asking you. Let me ask you about something else. I talked to your leader, Keir Starmer, a couple of weeks ago, and he said he thought that if it was necessary, 100,000 visas should go for HGV drivers to come into the economy. Do you agree with him?
I think that in the short term, we need to make sure that we have enough people doing the job.
So, yes, okay.
It isn't just HGV. There are obviously, as you know,
exactly
there's a
not.
large number of other things. And
So I was going to ask you particularly about social care, where there's away from the headlines, there's 120,000 vacancies in the social care industry in this country. Do you think visas should be available for them?
I believe that that is what the government will do, and I think that what they will do is not just look to Europe, they will look internationally, and they will be bringing people in, and what they will also be finding is there will be greater numbers of vacancies because they're insisting that everybody has a vaccine.
So that would be 220,000
Well,
people
I don't
coming
know
in.
for sure.
And what about hospitality? There's 180,000 vacancies.
Listen, what we need to do is we need to have a proper plan. We have been telling the government that it's all very well delivering on Brexit, but you have to make Brexit work. And there are a number of ways that you need to be looking at, and we are warning them that they need a proper strategy.
But it's a direct question about the number of visas that Labour would give to allow these shortages and these real problems in the economy and the social economy not to happen. Boris Johnson says, I won't pull that lever. Would Labour pull that lever?
What I would say is that we have a much... I don't believe that when people voted for Brexit, they voted for us to stop having any immigration at all. I just don't believe that. I believe that what they voted for was for our politicians to be responsible for making those decisions. And they need to be making responsible decisions in a strategic way, and they're simply not.
Emily Thornberry, thanks very much for coming in and talking to us. Now, apart from being an Oscar-winning movie star, George Clooney is a highly respected film director. His latest outing behind the camera is The Tender Bar, a coming-of-age tale about a boy growing up in small-town America during the 1970s and 80s. His father's walked out on his mother, and so the boy is taken under the wing of his Uncle Charlie, a bartender played brilliantly by Ben Affleck. When I caught up with George Clooney, I began asking what attracted him to this particular story and why it was so personally important to him in recent times.
We, as part of the human race, have been rather tough on one another for the last year and a half, or probably the last 5 or 6 years. And this was a really kind film.
It is.
It was gentle, and I needed that. And I felt like if I needed that, maybe other people would feel the same.
Mr. McGuire, it is a great pleasure to inform you that the admissions committee has voted to offer you a place in the Yale class of 1986.
মাত্র 40 মিনিট।
Also pleased to notify you that your financial need has been met.
It feels there's all sorts of things, but it's a nostalgia for a kind of better America. And it's an America where there are no iPhones, there are no tablets, there's none of that stuff. People are still focused on books. And to a certain extent, it seems to be a kind of hymn to what we would call the middle class, we call the working class.
Sure. Yeah, well, it is. In fact, there was I think it's closer to we would call it the working class there too, because they're struggling to get to the middle class, because there is a bit of class that plays out in this. There's a little bit of the have and haves not. There's a line in it where it says the real rich hide so people don't kill them, which is actually true. But there is a nostalgia, I think. It doesn't mean that we're right. We always look backwards and think, God, well, wasn't it nicer then? And I would imagine if you were African American